everyone, to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, Gwen. With me, as always, is Jared. How's it going, Jared?
It's going all right. As I mentioned to you off the stream, I'm be moving next weekend, so there are a lot of pieces that need to get put in place for that to happen. But for the most part, it was a nice week.
Good, good. Hi, Stephanie. Great to have you with us. Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear things are finally moving, no pun intended. Yeah, oh, God, the things have, I've mentioned this, I've mentioned this before, but things are getting better at the homestead here. Things were rocky for a while. But happy to report things are looking up. As we changed over to the new month last night, I was like, oh, thank God, that awful month of May, which hilariously, as Ari reminded me, is May was Mental Health Awareness Month.
Well,
And
you were aware. You were very aware.
I was aware. Just was not doing very well. So June feels like a breath of fresh air to me. I'm happy to report. But yeah, with the new month comes new content, and we are switching gears finally this week. Not for too long. We'll be back. We'll be back to Star Wars next week. But we're switching gears to another brand of sci-fi. Today, we're going to be talking about the 1999 classic film, The Matrix, which is like I often lament, about the passage of time and all that stuff. I'm not going to quite do that, but it is quite something, all the same, to put myself back in the mindset of 1999 when I was seeing this movie for the first time. And it was like, I remember saying to my friend Tim when we would watch it, back then, I was like, God, just imagine showing this movie to, people from 50 years ago, and they'd lose their minds at, all the new stuff that can be done. And now this movie is over half as much as that. We're not quite at the 50-year mark, but we have passed 25 years. And, but I will say, watching this movie, though, again, I feel the same way. I'm like, God, this movie does some really amazing stuff, and it was groundbreaking for a reason. And I'm just in awe of its, from the first moment it starts until the end of it. I think it deservedly earns the title of classic. And yeah, so I'm really excited to get to talk with you about it. I had been in the mood to revisit this film over the past couple months, but we just had a full slate of stuff we were already talking about, so we couldn't quite slot it in until now. And so we're going to talk about it. I'm going to assume you got to see The Matrix in theaters.
I did not, because
okay.
And the reason for that is that that I'm a few years younger than you, Gwen, and when The Matrix came out in 1999, I was 10 years old. Actually, I was 9 years old at the time, I think. I was aware there was a movie called The Matrix that had been released and was garnering a lot of different buzz. But my parents were not the type who were going to take me to see an R-rated movie when I was 9 years old. And so I distracted myself from that with 1999, even though people talk about this great year, film year, for me at that age, it was the year of the Phantom Menace, and that kind of like pushed everything else. And I caught up with the Matrix later.
It's so like, I'm just cracking up as you say, my parents were not about to, let me see, like an R-rated, movie. And I'm just cracking up because I guess the movie I'm about to mention came out in 1991, so I would have been 7 years old. They took me to see Terminator 2. So I'm like, yeah, my parents did not fall under that umbrella of not letting me see things. I did not necessarily, I will say I didn't necessarily understand the nature of profanity back then, at least not to the degree that I understand it now, because in preparation for seeing that movie at 7, I watched the first one on home video like a night or two before we went to go see it. And soon after recited a line to my mom from the end of the film that, let's just say, she had stern words for me. It went something along the lines of, "You're terminated, mother bleep." And yeah, I did not understand why that was so wrong. I soon found out. So maybe your parents were right to not be taking you to R-rated movies at 10 years old. But yeah, no, we all come to it in our own way. But I'm trying to think. So how old was I? I was 15 when I went to go see The Matrix. So I was fine. And even so, there wasn't like the profanity of the Terminator, so I would have been okay with this movie anyway, I think. But that's so wild, just because I just I mean, it makes sense obviously, but I just I think of The Matrix as such a seminal event in sort of pop culture. So when I'm talking to, someone who I'm, a few years older than you, but it's nowadays it's not by that much. And we often talk about the same thing. So the fact that you didn't get to see The Matrix in theaters, I'm like, oh wow, that's just, yeah, it was quite something. And I will also say, like, I don't know how it was for you when you eventually caught up with it, but there was something uniquely incredible about getting to see the film when it first came out and not really knowing what the hell it was. Because all of the advertising for the film was showing a lot of like cool stuff and just mind-blowing action and special effects and martial arts and all these wild things. And then it would just cut to Laurence Fishburne saying, "Unfortunately, no one can be told what The Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself." And then the whole first half hour of the actual movie is all like, characters asking the question, what is The Matrix? And it was just this really wild thing where if you were a regular uninformed moviegoer, maybe if you were more, it was tougher back then, but I imagine there were people more clued into like behind the scenes of films and production. And so they may have had an idea of what the film was about. But for most people, because this was way before the dawn of, the internet was out there, but it wasn't like it is today. No social media. And like I said, if you were just a normal average moviegoer, you weren't paying attention to like entertainment news sites, if there were any. And so we just went in blind and we were like, what is this? And so it was just a wild experience.
Mhm.
One that I'll never forget.
Yeah. No, and you were lucky that you were there at that precise moment in time to be able to experience it, because it is a seminal moment in movie history. This just happens to be one of the times where I fell on the wrong side of the dividing line.
Yeah.
And I ended up finding The Matrix a little bit later because my dad did buy the VHS copy of it, and he kept it out up in the weight room where he liked to watch movies. And I remember this was a case of me, surreptitiously watching an R-rated movie that I was not probably supposed to see at that age, because when I would go up there and I would see the cover and like the action, like on the back it had a picture, I think, of Neo and Agent Smith flying through the air shooting at each other, and there was that this is the one, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a description of the movie on the back. It talked about humanity being enslaved by computers and machines in this virtual world. So like I knew that was the premise of it. But as you outline that line from Morpheus, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. So watching the movie obviously was a far more rewarding experience. And I did think it was, obviously it blew my mind, perhaps not quite as much as it would have had I gotten to see it on the big screen. But the story was still there. The visuals were still incredible. The choreography of the combat, like, I just thought was awesome. So it got me extremely hyped for the sequels, which I did get to see in theaters. And I do like The Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, perhaps more than some do. I have not seen, I have not seen The Matrix Resurrections. I will just put out there the fourth one. I've never seen it, but I do think that the sequels actually. That was kind of my experience of getting to see the Matrix on the big screen for the first time. But the original is kind of in a class by itself.
Yeah, I don't want to venture into talking about the sequels because that's a whole different discussion. But the only thing that I will say about those films is that there's a lot about them that I like, and I like the concepts in them. It's just the overall execution is kind of where they fall short for me. But if we ever do those streams, in the future, I think there will be some interesting things to talk about. Like I said, there's a lot that I do like about them. One thing, like above all, and I'm gonna make sure to drop his name a lot in the stream, is the scores across the trilogy by Don Davis, who I think wrote one of the seminal film scores in cinema. And what's weird is that it was not that the music he wrote for these films did not really end up being trendsetters the way that a lot of film scores do. And I've always found that weird because they so defined these movies. And yeah, I just think they're incredible, and they do something that a lot of that I don't think any other film scores have really done, which is they evoke an electronic world while being scores that are completely classical in nature and using traditional instrumentation, but they sound so out of this world wild. I suspect that part of the reason why they didn't become big trendsetters and copied endlessly was because I suspect that for a lot of people, the actual contemporary music, the songs, like the needle drops in these films, were more prevalent in their minds. Which is understandable because, as we'll talk throughout this movie, there's some really great uses of contemporary music. But yeah, I've always been taken aback that for all that Hollywood loves to copy, I don't think the music for The Matrix ever fell victim to that. They feel like singular pieces onto themselves, which is actually nice because it's when you hear that sound, you know it's the Matrix, undoubtedly. So yeah.
No, I mean it's ultimately oh, hey Julie, nice to see you. So the it's a film score that is very, deliberately paired with this type of movie and what it is. Like there are certain movie scores that, like, great as they are, like theoretically, if you were to take the score from one historical sweeping epic and transpose it onto another one, like it could still fit, especially if it's the same composer. It's kind of hard to imagine another movie with a Matrix like score that's not dealing with this exact kind of milieu of, like, post-apocalyptic techno futuristic, combat extravaganza. So yes, it is almost a one of one, and across all the films, as you said, or at least the three I've seen.
Yeah. And the reason why I mentioned that it's one of the things that I love most about the sequels is because I feel like Don Davis raised his game with every score for these films. He's like, as extraordinary and classic as the score for this first film is, by the time we get to the climax of the third film, the piece is called Neo Dameron, as that's a joke at taken from Wagner's Ring cycle. It just becomes this choral epic, of insane proportions. So that is one aspect of the films that I think was uniformly amazing all throughout. But it all started here, and yeah, I'm just so in awe of every element of this movie. It's the fact that it stands up over a quarter of a century later is just incredible, and that's everything. That includes the visual effects, which were groundbreaking for the time. And I don't think, to my eyes, there's nothing that really I look at in this movie and I'm like, oh, that looks dated. It all still stands up insanely well.
Yeah. No, I mean, the visual effects of this movie are, they set a new standard in Hollywood for a reason. It's it was groundbreaking at the time. It rightly won the Oscar. Even over the Phantom Menace, I was like, this is one of the best Oscar wins in in history, I think. And it swept, the four categories it was nominated for: sound editing, film editing, sound editing, and best sound. So yeah, it was a technical marvel, but it's also one of the powers of it is, just how radical and revolutionary its story was. And I think it's an exceptionally well written film, obviously a very well directed film, and the acting, even though the acting style in certain respects could be considered a little bit more, buttoned down, because some of the characters are playing machines and the humans are, like, in very tense situations. So there is just an incredible spark, and there's a reason that this movie made superstars out of Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss, and obviously Laurence Fishburne was already a legend, but this movie elevated him just like the epitome of cool, because Morpheus was kind of like became a special figure.
Of course, this is where our generational differences really come into play. I'm like, what are you talking about? Keanu Reeves was already a superstar after Bill and Ted.
Well, he was in a certain respect, but I think it's fair to say he leveled up after this movie. There's a reason that this is still his most well-known role, although for some in the younger generation, John Wick might be taking that title. But Neo is a pretty singular character.
Oh yeah. When the younger people say the guy from John Wick, I'm like, no, please, God, no. And it's the same thing when I hear them reference Sean Astin as, you know, the guy from Stranger Things. I'm like, no. What are you doing to me? But
what about Hugo Weaving as the guy from Lord of the Rings? Can you get that behind that one?
oh
I'm kidding.
yeah, but I was actually thinking about this today, despite the fact that, you know, we, you know, all of us who love Lord of the Rings, you know, we think Hugo Weaving, and we're like, yes, he's part of the Lord of the Rings family. He's Elrond. But also, even I have to say that, like, I think Agent Smith is his, like, tour de force, you know, performance. I mean, you just watch the scene in this movie where he is interrogating Morpheus and he's talking about, you know, needing to escape, you know, and he needs the codes to Zion. So there will be no more need for me to be here anymore. Don't you understand? And he's just like, insane, like and I'm just watching it, I'm like, man, he brought it. Like, it's funny you talked about the acting, that there's, you know, people playing machines. I think as like the sort of the main machine character, he really, like, he pretty much, he comes close to stealing the show in this,
Yeah.
and I think he without a doubt steals the show in the sequels.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, I mean, that is obviously the paradox, is like, you know, a lot of movies that deal with movies about machines and artificial intelligence, you know, the rub is a lot of times they end up being even more human than the human characters, as they discover. And Agent Smith is one of those characters, even though he despises humanity. He has obviously certain elements that we would consider a very, you know, among the worst of humanity, and he embodies those quite well, especially in those scenes where, as you mentioned, he is torturing Morpheus or interrogating Neo. But, like, as you said, the visceral, like, his visceral need to get out of this place that he so loathes, and his willingness to do whatever he has to do it. That is what sets him apart from the other agents, and it's what makes him, when he comes back in the sequels as kind of this new version of Smith that has become almost a virus that the Matrix can't really control. It makes sense that it was him who managed to do that, because the other agents really are just, you know, agents of the greater machine, but Smith is not.
I do want to take a moment to just single out the actors who played the other agents, because they are not just you know, nameless faces. We have both Paul Goddard and Robert Taylor. Paul Goddard, of course, is known to many science fiction fans as Stark from Farscape. A really unique, crazy character in his own right. And Robert Taylor is known, at least to me, most for playing Walt Longmire in the series Longmire, which is a Western series, which is so great, which is so funny seeing him play an agent here, because you know, he's so full of emotion in Longmire. Yeah. So yeah, just really weird to see them standing all stoically, you know, in these roles. But that's the fun thing about going back to older films, you know. After years, you start to see where actors have, you know, had their bits of stardom. You know, although I will say Farscape was before this, so or maybe not. It was around the same time. But yeah, so just wanted to throw those mentions out there. But
we'll be talking about some of the other actors and like where you're like, I know that guy from somewhere, because there were a few.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about some of those people in this movie. Let's start off with Mr. Keanu Reeves as Neo himself. As I said, up to this point, I feel like a lot of people of my generation were like, oh, it's Ted from Bill. And also, God, what else had he done up to that? But he'd done some stuff. I remember there was a science fiction movie called Johnny Mnemonic or something like that, and so he sort of laid the groundwork for doing something like this. But it was, I think it was because he had played Ted and Bill and Ted. Like, people of my generation were just predisposed to love him, so he was a fantastic pick for this movie, just because we had so much affection for him.
Yeah, no, I mean, he had done a number of things. Point Break, that his performance in that. Bram Stoker's Dracula, he was Jonathan Harker in that. Much Ado About Nothing as Don John, and kind of a fun, loathsome, villainous turn. But it was kind of a fortuitous casting stroke that allowed him to become this role. Because if you go onto the Wikipedia page, they will note that he was not the first choice for this project. Will Smith was originally offered this role and turned it down. And then Warner Brothers tried to get Nicolas Cage, and they tried to get Brad Pitt, and they tried to get Val Kilmer. And then Leonardo freaking DiCaprio actually accepted the part, and then had to turn it down. And then the Wachowskis were actually pushing for Johnny Depp. So that's like 7 members of Hollywood royalty who went through this role before it got to Keanu Reeves, and somehow they got it right still.
God, that's just weird. I will say, like, out of all those names, like, I can envision an alternate reality where Will Smith was Neo.
So
like that seems such a really good fit. But yeah, no. I'm sure he had his reasons. He was doing pretty well at that point, so he certainly had his pick of whatever project he wanted to do, because he had done The Matrix, Men in Black. He was very popular.
Independence Day, yeah. So that makes sense. It does strike me as a little bit of like a sliding doors moment that Leo DiCaprio 2 years after Titanic could have been Neo. I have a harder time imagining Nicolas Cage in the part. I'll just say that, even though he's a great
that one felt random. But yeah, no, God, it's wild. But now I'm like, no, nobody else could have been Neo.
And actually, one more from the page. There was actually a brief period where the Wachowskis were considering gender flipping the role of Neo and having Sandra Bullock play the role. So that's
wow.
But obviously, they went with Keanu Reeves, and history has smiled brightly on that decision.
Yeah, it's great because not only was he fantastic for the part, but like, in an age where we're continually let down by our on-screen heroes, off-screen, Keanu Reeves has proven himself to be like one of the genuinely best people in the film industry, and he's just I love hearing him speak, because he always has really wonderful things to say. But now I love him in these films, and it's funny, like, I haven't actually seen the John Wick movies, and I feel like it's probably time for me to correct that.
They're kind of like the Fast and the Furious franchise, in that the first one starts off with actually a pretty grounded, story, and then with some incredible action. And by the time you get to the fourth one, you're just like, this is clearly taking place in ludicrous fantasy world. Because like there are sequences where it is literally there is no dialogue and it's just people shooting each other for 15 minutes, and it's incredible action. But it's a different type of
Yeah, no, it seems it. I will say it does seem more my jam than Fast and the Furious.
yeah,
It,
I think it's better than most of the Fast and the Furious
there,
movies. I will give
there's gun fights and martial arts action. I prefer that to like car races and
yeah.
and vehicle mayhem. Um, and there's a small part of me, I'm not gonna lie, that wants to finally go ahead and see the movies so I can go see Anna de Armas kick ass in the ballerina movie. Um, so but yeah, before we carry on with the cast, you dropped their combined name. Want to make sure, don't want to forget them right off the top. The Wachowskis, who started this whole crazy adventure and who have actually turned out to be some of my favorite filmmakers over the years, because not only do I love their work on The Matrix, but also I didn't see it until years later, but obviously Bound is an incredible piece of work. And I'm a really big fan of Cloud Atlas as well, which they didn't direct, but they spearheaded and wrote, I believe, as well as V for Vendetta. I mean, they've just put some amazing work out there. And their stuff doesn't always land perfectly. So, there's been some misfires, but I think they are some of the most imaginative filmmakers out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they actually did direct Cloud Atlas. They co-directed it with
Did they?
Tom Tolkien.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, their filmography has some up and downs for me, but their highs are very incredibly high. I will just acknowledge that even though we're talking about The Matrix, and it's probably their most famous and seminal film, my personal favorite of their films is actually V for Vendetta, and I hope that we get to talk about that at some point. But
yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, they are they have an interesting style of filmmaking, and they are obviously very committed to telling stories in a lot of heightened realities and far off worlds. Although Bound is a pretty down to earth film, I think.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's they clearly are well suited for it, because they have like they are the type who recognize that ultimately, even if you're telling a story in this fantastical world, that you really have to ground it in the human experience. And I think that the core ideas that are at the core of this film actually are pretty universal, and have to do with questions of identity and choice and place in the world, which obviously seem to have personal resonance for them for understandable reasons, but also for just in the sense of humanity as a whole having finding its place in a world that in many respects is trying to leave it behind. So yeah, they deserve a lot of the credit for this, because it really was their vision that made it the success that it was.
Yeah, you are right. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe it's because they co-directed the film, but yeah, it was Cloud Atlas was directed by the Wachowskis and Tom Twyker. Yeah, I love that film. It's not without its flaws. There's some. It was a questionable choice going the way they did with the makeup and all that stuff. But that's one of those things where I see what they were doing, but maybe they should have thought about the execution a little bit better there. But but as far as I love the actual story, the book that it's based on, written by the author David Mitchell. It's a great story, and And again, like I have to highlight the score for that film, which was written by Tom Twyker, Johnny Klimek, and Reinhold Hale. Hale, yeah, which is one of my favorite scores for any film ever. So that's an example where I will take the film flaws and all, because it does some really interesting things. But I will agree with I am not sure that it comes on, that it beats The Matrix for me, but V for Vendetta has to be at least my second favorite film of theirs. Which that actually was not directed.
Yeah, that's kind of a way we could split the difference. It's because V for Vendetta was actually directed by James McTeague. I just think of it as a Wachowskis film because they wrote it, were the big creative director on it. But yes, if we're saying the favorite film directed by the Wachowskis, it's The Matrix.
Yeah. So like they're absolute geniuses, and I adore their work. As far as like you mentioned not having seen The Matrix Resurrections. I also have not seen that yet, and that was directed solely by Lana Wachowski. And I'll see it one of these days. I just I remember being moody about that. I'm like, no, don't touch it after all this time. But I'm sure I'll watch it sooner or later. But yeah, so I just wanted to tip my cap to them and their extraordinary vision for all of these films. It's a remarkable achievement. And I'm sure we'll talk about, their work as we go through the film, because this is, obviously, they created it. But continuing on with the cast, you mentioned just this film catapulting Laurence Fishburne, and I'm just like, every time and it's so funny because I didn't know Laurence Fishburne before this. So when, and I hadn't picked up on the fact that we actually do see a picture of Morpheus on Neo's computer before we ever hear his voice. But when I first heard his voice, I've got no conception of who that voice belongs to. So it feels like Neo is speaking to God, basically, which is, and there's so much that sort of feeds into that brilliant bit when Trinity comes up to Neo in the club and she says, I know why you're here, Neo. I know why you stay up night after night on your computer. You're looking for him. And there's so much religious connotation with that. So it's when you do hear Morpheus's voice on the other end of the phone, it is, and it's like, do you know who this is? And Neo goes, Morpheus. He does feel like a deity, and it's all building up to that moment where, would go into the old building and, and he turns around and bam, there's Morpheus. You get to see for the first time. And hey, it's Laurence Fishburne, a face that I will never, ever forget, after that. And yeah, he's just absolutely incredible as this wonderfully flawed, devout warrior who will fight for what he believes in and empower other people, all in pursuit of what he believes in. And I think also Laurence Fishburne gets some great stuff in the sequels when he's when he has to doubt what he's believed. And then ultimately sees his faith rewarded just in a different way than he thought it was going to be. And I think it's a beautiful character. I think it's, you know, we can say it so easily about the Matrix, and that there are so many characters who have become classic film characters and are, you know, great archetypes, you know, just and so much of that has to do with the brilliance of the performances. And yeah, Morpheus is just the guy who, like, you would line up to follow him, maybe rightly or wrongly, but I don't think you would ever question it.
No, he just has an intent, you know, a very real and immediately evident charisma from the second he steps on screen, and Larry Fishburne has always had that, but in particular in this scene, like, you know, wearing the dark coat and the sunglasses, you know, and
by the way, those glasses are the coolest goddamn thing on the planet. The way they just snap into place.
Yeah,
I'm like, I still want those glasses.
Yeah, no, I mean it takes a special man to pull off being able to wear sunglasses indoors, and Laurence Fishburne is that special man, because he just makes it look like the coolest. He is. I keep using the word cool, but that's just what I think of him as. Like, he represents an ideal of this incredibly badass and capable revolutionary who is, you know, leading the resistance in many respects. I know obviously he's part of a larger structure in Zion, as we learned in the sequels, but in this movie, he is it. He is the one that the machines fear, because he is the one who is in many respects cracked the code and shattered their worldview, and now he is leading others along behind him. And yes, so that moment when Neo gets to meet him face to face, you know, it feels monumental, because it is. You know, Morpheus is he is the pinnacle of what humanity in this era is striving to regain. And so I think that Laurence Fishburne embodies that incredibly well, but then he also manages to be very grounded and human, and, you know, and show tremendous empathy to Neo as he's going through this incredibly traumatic and dangerous journey. Like, I love the little moment of performance when, after Neo is waking up from the Matrix for the first time, and he, you know, and Morpheus is there to comfort him, and Neo asks the question, you know, why do my eyes hurt? And Neo and Morpheus kind of just responds quietly, "You've never used them before." And so, yeah, he is. He has an incredible range, and I do think that he gets great material in the sequels as well. But his performance in this movie really is kind of the standard. Like, in many respects, even though Neo is kind of like the central character, and Trinity obviously has, you know, is iconic in her own right, I think when a lot of people think of the Matrix, they think of Laurence Fishburne as Morpheus, because he kind of just sets that bar.
Yeah, there's another bit that I picked up on that I don't know that I've ever noticed before, or at least I never assigned meaning to in the way that I did on this viewing, and maybe it's because now I know all three of the films so well, but there's a bit after Neo's interrogation by the agents, when he wakes up in bed thinking, oh, it's all been a dream. And he gets a call from Morpheus, and Morpheus says, they got to you first, but they've underestimated how important you are. If they know what I know, you'd certainly be dead. And then he says, now do you still want to meet? And I think it's very important that he poses that question to Neo. Like, even after that, it's still up to Neo. Mm-hmm. He's presenting Neo with a choice, and choice is such an important part of the story, and it becomes even more important in the sequels. And and that was a little touch that I just hadn't noticed before. Even though, yes, it can be argued that like Neo doesn't quite understand what he's getting into, and he won't for about 10 or 15 more minutes. But all along the way, nowhere does Morpheus say this is what you need to do. He's constantly presenting Neo with a choice, and so at the end of the day, it's it's what he says. Like he can show Neo the door, but he's the one who has to walk through it.
Yeah, and this is a case where, like, obviously, even though the story is dealing with ideas of prophecy and chosen heroes in the concept of the one, it is incumbent upon us as the audience to remember that those prophecies have weight because the characters of the stories believe them, but also because characters make choices that lead them to their destiny. Destiny in this world is not an external force that is moving these characters around like a chess piece. The characters have to embrace that destiny, and in some cases defy it. Because in particular, like one of the central scenes in the entire movie is the moment of choice, the blue pill and the red pill, and what those represent. And there is a world where Neo could have done what Cypher ultimately wanted to do, which is take the blue pill, and then he would have woken up in bed, and he would not have been the one in that instance, even if he was like made for it. He would have chosen not to follow that path. But of course, he takes the red pill, and we get the rest of the story. But there are also, again, and this again, I know we don't really want to get into the sequels, but like when we learn more about the construct of the one and like how it fits into the Matrix, and Neo has a role that he's supposed to play in that construct, and then he chooses to defy that to go save Trinity, and that ends up being the thing that leads to the ultimate victory. It reminds us that he is the figure of legend in the one because his choices are making him the hero that he becomes.
Yeah, and that is like I won't be too strict about talking about the sequels, because I do think some of it absolutely informs what happens in this movie, and it's impossible to watch this movie and hear them talking about the one and the prophecy without thinking about what happens in those films. I think what's really important about it is that this film sets up a very traditional, like, chosen one, you will fulfill your destiny and save everyone, trope, for lack of a better term. And it's interesting that what the sequels do is deconstruct that and rebuild the story into still a hero's journey, but not a you are the chosen one and therefore you will save us all. It is you will save us all because you chose to, because it's you, not this function that you represent. It's you making these choices and doing what you believe to be right. At the end of the day, Neo, the chosen one, doesn't succeed. It's Neo, the human, who makes his own choices and overcomes the construct that the machines have put into motion, and and saves those closest to him, and in effect the rest of the human race, which I think is it's a beautiful story, which is why, like, for all the grievances that I do have with certain things in the sequels, the ideas of those movies are not something I have any issue with. I think there's some beautiful ideas behind both films 2 and 3. So yeah, and it's impossible to think about this movie without considering this, because you could look at this film and if you're one of those people who just only considers the first film and doesn't think about the sequels, then this film is a very sort of traditional chosen one narrative in which Neo fulfills that role as a chosen one. But I think it's an even more interesting story to deconstruct that and then rebuild Neo as a different kind of hero.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But okay, let's talk now about Miss Carrie-Anne Moss playing Trinity. Talking about another icon to come out of this movie. Yeah, no, this is just going to be me gushing about, all of these actors. Like, I freaking love Trinity. She is like the ultimate embodiment of that, kick-ass, badass heroine who you don't want to mess with. You want her in your corner. And yeah, no, she's great. And likewise, this was, I think, the first time I'd ever seen Carrie-Anne Moss in anything. But now every time she pops up, it's like we all got super excited that she was in The Acolyte purely based off the fact that, oh my God, Trinity's in Star Wars.
Yeah. And she got to do some of that in that show, but ultimately this is really where these movies are in many respects a vehicle for Carrie-Anne Moss to just be the pinnacle of awesomeness. And yeah, like she also is playing a role in this movie where she is kind of the one who is leading Neo down the path in many respects, because she is the one who finds him and after he has been searching for Morpheus, and she's the one who kind of helps get him to Morpheus in the first place. But she also has her own complicated relationship in the sense that she has been told that she, like, again, getting back to the ideas of like choice and how much it actually is present, the fact that she has been told by the Oracle that she is in, she would fall in love with the one. And love is obviously something where we have a feeling that like there's not always a strict element of choice to it. Sometimes it just happens to you. But in many respects, does Neo become the one because she loves him? That is another element that is introduced here. But yeah, I mean, like on a more superficial level, like is somebody else who is great at rocking sunglasses indoors and wearing black leather and performing incredible action stunts. Carrie-Anne Moss is one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah. Yeah, the black leather always helps. Like, are we seeing a trend with me? The 90s, opposite ends of the 90s. But as I'm growing up, you've got Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, and then Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity. I'm just saying, it's
there's a line, there's a connection.
there's a foundation being laid. But yeah, no, but I love her so much, and like, and call me a sappy romantic. I love the whole through line in these movies about the idea that Neo has to be the one because Trinity falls in love with him, and it's just I eat that kind of stuff up. I love it. And yeah, give me like an apocalyptic, sci-fi action thriller that ends with true love and these two people leaning in for a kiss at the end of the movie. It's all that stuff. It's this movie knows its audience when I'm watching. So, but yeah, and then like again, I'll just say it. I was wrong about not talking about the sequels because it's impossible to not bring that into the discussion, because I love their whole thing about neither one of them is willing to let the other one go until the very end of the story. And it's, I think, some people might call it, cheesy, but one of my favorite sequences in the entire trilogy is in the second film when Trinity dies and Neo basically won't let her die and, and brings her back to life. And it's, it's just so wonderful. And I like that we have the same thing at play here in the first one at the end of this film, that Trinity sees Neo die and won't accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And through the power of their love, he is brought back to life, and it's just wonderful. It's, if you're gonna go for all these far out, like concepts that the movie is dealing with of, the future where machines are controlling the human race, and and all these like prophecies, and and Japanese inspired, martial arts action, like, go ahead and give me True Love too. It's fantastic, and like I said, some other people might roll their eyes at it. I'm not one of them. I'm here for it.
It ultimately, like, this is what I was talking about earlier, when it's like the movie, even though it has an incredibly far out and revolutionary and radical milieu that it takes place in, the themes and the motivations driving the characters are very elemental, and nothing is more elemental in that respect than love, true love.
I think you mean true love.
I did. But yes, it's and the relationship between Trinity and Neo is wonderful. Like, we don't get the revelation that like the spoken revelation that Trinity loves Neo until closer to the end of the movie. But even from the beginning, you can sense the connection that the two of them have, and it's very organic that these two do not just feel like characters who are falling in love because of the circumstance. It does feel like destiny in many respects, but it's destiny because they ultimately choose each other again and again and again and again throughout the course of these three movies, until they both make the final choices that lead them, that lead to their ends. At least until the fourth movie, which brings them both back, and which again I haven't seen.
Yeah. By the way, did I say that the black leather was a necessity? Because it's not, because
No.
here we got just a raggedy blue shirt, and she's rocking that. So
yeah, no, Carrie-Anne Moss does not need the help, but the black leather does, accentuate her best qualities.
Yeah. I was just going to mention real quick, but I don't want to go too far down the road, because then we'll be having a whole different conversation. I was just saying, I do remember when The Acolyte was out that there was speculation that like it had been considered to get Keanu Reeves to play Master Saul.
I remember hearing that,
and like I think things shake out the way they were meant to, but that definitely would have made for an interesting viewing, just carrying like everything, our sort of whole emotional history with Neo and Trinity, and that's, at the end of the day, maybe that's why it didn't happen, just because it would have been maybe the wrong kind of baggage. But also, I'm like, in my fantasy, I'm like, that would have been cool.
It would have. I mean, like, I'm not going to say anything bad about Lee Jung Jae's performance in The Acolyte. I think I thought that he was great. But yeah, Keanu Reeves probably would have might have helped, bring more eyes to it, but it also might have overshadowed it a little bit.
Yeah.
But it is fun when they can draw those connections, like in the aforementioned John Wick, movies. Starting with the second one, they bring in Laurence Fishburne to play a character in those movies, a very different character from Morpheus, but still one who has a fun dynamic with Keanu Reeves.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think I probably just enjoy like thinking about that alternate reality more than like I'm perfectly happy with the way the show it ended up, and I think as it is, the Master Soul that we got was probably the best version of that character, but yeah, it's fun to think about. But yeah, so now I'm gonna we did talk a bit about Hugo Weaving, so we can talk about him some more. But the person that I really want to highlight next is one of my absolute favorite character actors, Joe Pantoliano, who plays Cypher. I love this man so much. He's not a good person in this, but oh my god, is he just absolutely delightful. He's he worked with the Wachowskis in Bound. Before this, he had also been in The Fugitive, is something that comes to mind. And by now he's been in so many things. I think he was in The Sopranos at some point.
I would be shocked if he had not was not.
And so many things.
Memento is what I primarily associate him with, but
absolutely Memento. Yeah, no. What's great about him in this is that he is even though is playing a bit of a dick, he's also a really lovable dick. And so his betrayal, while it seems like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, it also catches you off guard, because you just want to like him so much. And especially I think he's at his most likable right before we find out that he's a traitor. In that great scene with Neo, in front of the console, where he's having fun bantering with him, and he's also giving him what he feels is the best advice when he says, "You see an agent, you do what we do, run your ass off." And yeah, I just so it always hurts that he turns out to be a traitor, but he's so fun to watch while he's doing it.
No, I mean he has a certain level of charisma that makes you want to like him, even though there was always a part of me that's like, there's something off about this guy, and indeed there very much is. And I kind of one of the things I find most effective about the character of Cypher, who he plays, is he represents in many respects again a darker side of humanity that we all recognize in ourselves, and we do not want to believe that we would make that choice, but there are some of us who probably unfortunately would fall down this same path, like when he's having the scene with Agent Smith and talking about the fact that he's looking at the steak and says the Matrix is telling my mind that it is juicy and delicious. You know what I've realized after 9 years? Ignorance is bliss. And obviously that is a concept that intellectually to us kind of repels us, the idea that this man would willingly want to plug himself back into the Matrix, into a world he knows is not real, so that he can sell out all of his compatriots so that he can basically be rich in this fictional world. But we are going to unfortunately recognize that living in this incredibly dark and hard world would probably break some of us more than we would want with it.
I think there is also a part of him, even though the obvious thing is when he says, I don't want to remember nothing. Like the first thing that comes to mind is that, well, yeah, in order to fully enjoy, being back in the Matrix, he doesn't want to know that he's in the Matrix. But also, I think there's a part of it also. I think a very big part of him doesn't want to remember what he's done to get back in there. And so for all his talk in the big scene, and I'm sure it's coming from a truthful place, there is still part of him, I think, that feels guilt about what he's doing. But he's full of the knowledge that he's not going to have to remember. So he thinks it's actually going to work out really good for him.
Yeah, and one of the ways that he's dealing with that guilt is by externalizing it in the form of blame and placing it all on Morpheus, the man he's going to be selling out to the agents, where he basically is, when he weeps up on them, it's like, surprise, asshole. And he is talking essentially about the fact that you lied to us. If you had told us what this actually was, if in this kind of dystopian, a post-apocalyptic world, none of us would have agreed to come with you. And that goes back to the line that of Morpheus saying no one can show you what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. And Cypher did, and unfortunately that he's not as strong-willed as Neo or Trinity or many of the other characters on the ship. He is regretting that decision because, it's a scary thing to have made this leap and then find yourself in the situation and realize that, like, I have traded what was essentially a life of comfort, even if it was a lot based in a lie that I didn't realize at the time, a dream, for this hellscape. And for him to want to escape from that is understandable, but that's obviously not what characters who we look up to as heroes do. They push through that adversity and try to find a better world for all. And so ultimately, Cypher is a very selfish character. I don't know how, like, I would consider him evil. He commits evil acts, but I think that he's reached the point where he has recognized that he's either going to give his life for a cause that he no longer really believes in, or he is going to essentially go back and take other people's choices away so that he can have the choice to live in ignorance. And given that, what some of the things that we see in the real world of people who are willing to look past the suffering of others in order to fulfill their own, selfish desires at times, again, he represents a side of humanity that we unfortunately have to reckon with ourselves.
Yeah, and not just with other people, but within ourselves. I think that it's been really interesting of late to, I'm going to sort of cross over to our Andor discussion a little bit. We had a certain take on the character of Perrin when we were talking, and it's been interesting listening to other discussions, people taking more of a hard line with Perrin. And it's interesting that I think that there's a tendency now for people to, because we're all so eager to prove that wouldn't be us. We're better than that we're going to draw a hard line with fictional characters that we see doing those things that, that we don't want to see in ourselves. And the fact of the matter is, I stand by what I said in that stream, that I think that, Perrin is a very weak character, but he's also one of the most human, perhaps one of the most human characters of that show. And I think the same is true of Cypher here. I think Cypher does much more horrible things than than Perrin
absolutely.
does. He's committing murder, and
Yeah.
and all this. This isn't just like, being like, even though he mentions ignorance is bliss, this isn't just him being ignorant of some things and living in his own world. This is actively turning over his friends and family, and in some cases killing them himself. But what's at the root of that is this very human thing of, I think one of his best lines is, because this is something that I feel like everybody who watches it, when he says it, everybody in the audience feels this in their bones of something of, yes, that is exactly how I would feel. He says, if you had told us the truth, we would have told you to take that red pill and shove it right up your ass. And I'm sorry, but like, if you're a person in the audience and there isn't at least part of you that's saying like, yep, I agree with that statement, then you might be being dishonest with yourself. Just saying. So I think that, what Cypher actually does is horrific, but what's at the root of that and what he's feeling is something that is very human, and I think something that we can all, or at least most of us, can identify with. And that's what makes him such a fascinating character, because he is a mirror of the audience in a lot of ways, because like, we are not, as much as we might like to think it, we are not the Morpheuses, we are not the Trinities or Neos. Like, we're not committing murder, but at heart, I think most of us are Cypher, where we, like, if we got ourselves into that situation, it would not be because we thought it through carefully. Like, I'm speaking for myself. Like, if like the brutal truth was set before me, I got to be honest. I'd probably just say, you know what, you all go fight for humanity. I'm fine right here. Because you're opening yourself up for a lot of hardship, and I don't know. I say that, but nobody knows how they're going to react. Like, once you know the truth about something like that, then the question becomes, will you actually act on it? But I think most of us would say we probably would wish that we didn't know. And again, Cypher represents that aspect of us. And yeah, so, and that's why he's he's a brilliantly written character, and Joe Pantoliano just plays him so amazingly. And like I said, I've always been a huge fan of his. And yeah, now that you mentioned Memento, I'm like, God, how did I not mention Memento right off the bat? Just, yeah, I love it. Like, Lenny! Suppose I've already told you about my condition. Oh, only every time I see you. Oh God, he's great in that. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I feel about Cypher. I wish he didn't do the horrific things that he does, but I think we can all empathize with the emotions that he's feeling.
Yeah, and I think that even people who take a hard line with characters like Cypher, they probably just aren't wanting to acknowledge the extent to which they may be empathizing with it. And because again, people, like, there are people in this world who would make a better choice, be more like the characters of Neo and Trinity and Morpheus. But the instinct to do what Cypher does and try to retreat and take it back is one that, if you're denying that in yourself, then you're probably just being a little bit too hard line. And obviously what the movie does is it kind of takes that conflict and it dramatizes it to a greater extent by having Cypher commit murder and things. So, and that's why he's ultimately a villainous character. But this is where, most of the movie's antagonists are these machines, these great AI entities that are almost unknowable to us, and it's essential that we have essentially two antagonists who are a little bit deeper than that. In Smith, who is a machine, but is showing us some of the darker, crueler aspects of humanity that are making him a more pronounced antagonist, and then Cypher, who is representing kind of the more cowardly and aspects of humanity that we need to overcome in order to go on that hero's journey.
Yeah. Speaking of Smith, let's go ahead. We did talk with him, talk about him a little bit, but there's so much more to mine there. The great Hugo Weaving, who pretty much had the market cornered on like sci-fi fantasy projects in this era of movies. I think that there's just one part that I have to talk about, and then we can talk about the rest of his character, which is just that interrogation scene with Neo. It's like, in one life, you're Thomas G. Anderson. You work for a respectable software company. And then he says some other things. And he says, you help your landlady carry out her garbage. Which never fails to crack me up. I love him so much.
Yeah.
It's so great because he's saying these, he's listing off these things, as much as we talk about where you're gonna sort of reveal the more human layers of Smith as the story goes on, and the fact that he starts to really lose his cool. The way he begins in this movie is like he's reading off these things, but he's reading it in a very machine-like way, like he's reading from a script. And so the way that he accentuates words that he's reading off, it just makes it so funny. And yeah, I just love the back and forth in that scene when Neo's like, wow, that sounds like a really good idea. I got a better one. How about I give you the finger and you give me my phone call?
Yeah. No, I think that Hugo Weaving does some brilliant modulating of his performance from the beginning of the movie even towards the end, and then obviously carries on with the sequels. But just the way that he says Mr. Anderson every time is just so it's a performance in and of itself. And I think that ultimately what makes it so effective is that he's not just a static machine, he is an artificial intelligence. And one of the things that artificial intelligences can do, and which distinguish them from other more standard machines, is that they can learn, they can adapt. And in many respects, I think what makes Smith such an effective performance is that he, from being in this place, the Matrix, and interacting with these humans, he is learning more about them and almost absorbing some of their characteristics. That's like you mentioned the whole, and you help your landlady carry out her garbage. And he almost seems to be stumbling on that because he's like, why would you do that? Whereas we as humans understand the human response behind it, but it ultimately plays into the idea that when Smith is interrogating Morpheus and he sends the other agents out of the room so that he can get down to brass tacks, which he's not he's not devoted to this greater cause of the Matrix, and as would be dictated by his programming. He's like, I hate this place, this zoo, this prison, this reality, whatever you want to call it. I can't stand it any longer. It's the smell, if there is such a thing. I feel saturated by it. I can taste your. Okay. Sorry, what?
Come on. The fact that he says, it's the smell. Yeah.
Yes,
He just says it so comically.
he does. It's this movie might not have as many jokes as you would think, but it's funny. But yeah, when he says, "I feel saturated by it. I can
Hi,
taste your
Jay. How are you doing? Great
I
to
can
see you.
taste your stink, and every time I do, I fear that I've somehow been infected by it. It's repulsive, isn't it? Question mark. I must get out of here. I must get free. And once Zion is destroyed, there is no need for me to be here. And that is where he's almost recognizing, like, I recognize that this place is changing me. I am recognizing that I am becoming more human than by being here, and I fucking hate it. Thank you. I am becoming infected, and him almost reckoning with the concept, like in that line when he's like, "It's repulsive, isn't it? I've never really had the opportunity to consider something repulsive before, but now I am, and I don't like it," which obviously makes it all the more beautiful. Like, again, getting into the sequels when one of his virus variants ends up infecting a human that goes back into the real world, and then he's having to reckon with actually being in a physical human body, and he's both fascinated by it and horrified by it. But yeah, it's ultimately a case of him becoming more human almost against his will, and then raging against that possibility.
Yeah. Oh God, I would have to look it up, like the whole speech, to even say a little bit. But there is this bit in The Matrix Reloaded where when right before the big brawl, where he walks up to Mr. Anderson and he starts like just giving this long speech, and it's just full of like run-on sentences. and then Neo's like, "Congratulations," and he goes, "Thank you. However," it's just, I mean, Hugo Weaving is just so brilliant in these movies, and the reason why I say he steals the show in the sequels is because I feel like he's almost acting in a different movie from everybody else in the sequels. Like, he is having so much campy fun.
Yes.
In those movies that it's so delightful. But yeah, it's I love him, and yeah, there are certain sequences that I want to discuss in full, so I want to save some of that stuff. But yeah, there's stuff like Morpheus, like slams down out of the wall on top of him, and he's like, Morpheus, I presume, and you are Smith, Agent Smith. You all look the same to me. Oh God, I love him so much, and it's like I said, I feel like this has to be like Hugo Weaving's like masterpiece, of a as far as his characters go. We all love Elrond, but I mean, he's never had more fun than when he was playing Agent Smith. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is like the role where he gets to cut loose the most, because like, I think his performance in V for Vendetta is incredible in a very different way, because he's masked the entire time, and he has no way of using his facial expressions. He has to do it all through vocal timbre. But in this movie, he gets the full bag of tricks, and just few people have ever sneered better than Hugo
I
Weaving
will
in these
say
movies.
his opening V speech in V for Vendetta, where like almost every word starts with a V. And Natalie Portman just looks at him like, what the hell? And then he finishes and she caps it all off with, "Are you like a crazy person?"
Revolution is not for the sane, as a famous
I am certain they
character.
will say so. Yeah. Oh God. Now we're gonna have to talk about that movie too at some point. But yeah. We can go ahead and yeah, I want to save some Smith stuff for talking about the actual action sequences and stuff. But real quick, I want to make sure to pay tribute to some other actors in the film who we don't necessarily have to spend as long on, because I want to get to like talking about certain sequences throughout the film. But although no, actually I take that back. There is one who I would want to. There was at least one more that I want to highlight on their own, and that is Gloria Foster as the Oracle. Who just I will say it broke my heart when she died before she could film her scenes for the third film, just because she is such a presence, and one of my favorite parts of this movie, and what she injects, a certain kind of life into the movie when she shows up, and yeah, I just I love her, and it's so wild that she only has one scene in the movie. She even just when it was only this film, she felt so absolutely crucial to the entire thing. Yeah, don't worry about the vase. What vase? That vase. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
What's really going to bake your noodle later on is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything? No, I mean, this was a brilliant choice to have him have the Oracle, be essentially a very grandmotherly figure, very humble and but still sharp-witted, having her baking cookies as she's dispensing this incredible life wisdom. And Gloria Foster obviously was perfect casting for that kind of role, but it shouldn't be overlooked that was the direction they went for the role at all, because frankly they could have made her much more visually impressive, but instead they just trusted Gloria Foster to carry that weight on her own.
Yeah, it's funny because it's funny. We go back to the things from childhood. When I heard the Oracle, I just thought about there's an episode, at least one episode in the classic He-Man series where I think it's Tila has to go to an Oracle, and so I'm like, you're thinking this very mystical, energy force, and then you see the Oracle of this film, and it's just a grandmother baking cookies. It was absolutely delightful.
Yeah, no, I had a similar experience where I was remembering the Oracle from Aladdin and the King of Thieves. And also Oracle, the Bat, Barbara Gordon's alias. And so yes, this Oracle was not what I was expecting. But in particular,
it's really the best kind of Oracle.
Oh yeah, an Oracle who will give you cookies instead of threatening you can ask me 3 questions, but you may not like the answers. And here she's basically just here, let me have a look at you, and asking him, Neo, essentially to lead him to his own answers, where when she gives him a little speech about she has the in particular. This is actually a link to classical mythology. There's a saying over the Oracle at, I think it's Delphi. There's a saying over the temple where it says "Know thyself," and they echo that here by having her have this "Know thyself" little crochet thing above the door. But as she goes on to say, it's Latin, it means know thyself. I want to tell you a little secret. Being the one is just like being in love. No one needs to tell you that you are in love. You just know it through and through. Which obviously that has beautiful resonance with both Neo's story, but also Trinity's story. And I think, and I love the little undercurrent of that, where she talks about Trinity. She's like, "You're cuter than I thought. I can see why she likes you." Who? Not too bright though. Yeah, so Trinity's making it pretty obvious.
Yeah. And so she's a very delightful oracle, but not in the business of giving great news either. But it's all about directing Neo on the path that he needs to be on. And as Morpheus will say later, you're going to learn just as I did. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Yeah. Of course, then we can delve into, all the stuff that the sequels will bring into this, though how much is just in a way, this is just a manipulation, but as we see, the Oracle has her own end game in mind for all this. So even though while she's seemingly guiding Neo along the path that he's supposed to be on for what the machines want, she's also guiding him on the path that she thinks he's and telling him things that are going to serve him well when he needs to make his own decisions as well. And so she's a tricky one, the Oracle, and it's just a shame that Gloria Foster didn't get to play that role through to completion. Just because she really is one of my favorite characters in the story. I think it still works, but she has a twinkle in her eye that that brought something extra special.
And another great exchange I just want to highlight from this moment, because it really does have resonance for not only this movie but the entire trilogy, where she's looking at him and she says, "Okay, now I'm supposed to say this interesting," but then you say, "But what?" And Oracle says, "But you already know what I'm going to tell you." And Neo kind of smiles and says, "I'm not the one." And she says, "Sorry, kid, you got the gift, but it looks like you're waiting for something." And when Neo asks her what, she says, "Your next life, maybe. Who knows? That's the way the things go." And you're like, yeah, there it is. But because again, it goes back to the idea of the vase. Like, if the Oracle came straight out and told him in this scene, "Yes, you're the one," would Neo have actually believed it? Would he have made the choices that he does that lead him to become that? Would he have broken the vase if she hadn't told him it was there? One of the reasons he does what he does at the end of the movie is, he feels almost guilty in the sense that Morpheus is giving his life to save him, believing that he's the one, and he doesn't believe he is the one. So he's like, "I've got to go back and save him," so he doesn't give his life for nothing. But of course, that makes him the one. So
Oh, well, and one other thing I want to mention, would be remiss if, right before he goes and talks to the Oracle, there's also the famous "there is no spoon" scene where he talks to the young boy, which it is funny to me seeing these are the other potentials, and then it's like, "Oh, sorry, kids, Keanu Reeves just entered the picture." Too bad for y'all.
Maybe in the next life.
But no, it's so funny. Just think, we were all so innocent, back then. Just now these things are there is no spoon, and it's such a sort of commonplace thing from the movie that we all know, but getting to see these moments and hear these lines and stuff for the very first time back in '99. It's just it was so fun watching this movie, without having all the sort of cultural baggage that it has now. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's fun, because the films have taken root in pop culture, but it was just so wild to like have this line here and have the bending spoon, and then have that pay off later on in the movie when he says there is no spoon, with the elevator shaft. And yeah, it's just so wild thinking back to when all this stuff was fresh and new, and didn't yet quite have the same connotation that it does now.
Yeah, no, and we'll just I'll own up to it. Much like any young kid who sees the Star Wars movies is going to try to see, hey, can I move that thing using the Force? I did pick up a spoon every so often. And Logan's like, can I make it bend it? Is there really no spoon? In this case, no, there is.
I cannot tell you how many times as a young kid that I tried to. I was confident that I would be able to like unlock a mutant power and move something with my mind. And I thought other people just can't do it because they don't actually believe it. If I believe it hard enough, I can make it happen.
Yeah.
Oh God.
This is where our love for fantasy storytelling might have gotten us into a little bit of trouble, but it gave us so many other good things.
I'm not even going to entirely say that I've given up.
You never should, Just
always
believe in that little bit of magic.
It'll happen one day. Oh, it'll happen when I'm almost on my deathbed, and I'll be like, "Fuck, what am I supposed to do with this now?"
Wait for your next life.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and then just real quick, I want to, because we're going to do the mid-roll in a second here, and then come back and talk about some standout sequences. But I do also want to mention, some of these other wonderful actors. Let's see if I can get their names right. Julian Arahanga as APOC, who is one of the members of the Nebuchadnezzar. Basically a really tough guy who I would not want to mess with. Cypher should rot in hell for what. For what oh, he's not the real tough. Sorry, I'm getting my guys mixed up. I'm thinking of Dozer. APOC is the one who mercilessly gets unplugged. Yeah. And him along with Switch. They get done so dirty. They're great. Switch is played by Belinda McClory. What's interesting about her is that at one point is probably a bit too soon in the industry for them to push this, but I know that the desire was there to have her as transgender, and which we can now obviously see the reasons why they would have wanted to do that. To have her basically be female in the real world, but then in the Matrix be male. And I think you can see that she's very androgynous in the Matrix. So I think like the intent is still there, but I think 1999 was just like it was. We weren't there yet for the studios to allow something like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe towards the end of the stream we can have a whole discussion about how this movie has kind of been recontextualized in the in the light of the Wachowskis transition, and they're coming out and speaking that like this movie is in many respects a transgender allegory. And I think that like I will save it for there, but I'll just say like it's obviously there. It's just that I tend not to like to see movies as pure allegories. I like to engage with the story on like as the story, but yes, it's clearly there. And the character of Switch, probably if this movie were being made today, they would have gone down that road. So and I will just note on the amusing level, Switch is the source for one of the more famous meme gifs online. The sadly in the movie, but in the whole not like this, which people use to humorous effect, but in the movie it's a horrifying moment.
Oh god, using terribly tragic moments on film. It's I'm going to see if I can paraphrase that Peter Jackson line. Trauma on film is temporary, humor on social media is forever.
Wise guy.
Yeah. We have Anthony Ray Parker as Dozer. Big guy. Don't want to mess with him.
His brother.
Marcus Chong as Tank. Another one of my absolute favorite characters in this movie. He's great. I don't know the full history as to like I assuming there was money stuff at the root of it, and I don't know, but I just remember being sad that Tank wasn't back for the sequels, just because he was so much fun in this movie, and would have been nice to have carry over, but things happen the way they happen, and he's great in this movie.
And his iconic send off to Cypher of where Cypher's like, no, I don't believe it. It's like, believe it or not, you son of a bitch, you're still gonna burn. It's like that's what you would want to say to the man who just gunned down your brother.
Yeah. Oh god, it's so great, and he's just great throughout. Yeah, he's the ultimate guy in the chair. And just little stuff like not even little stuff. He has like so many great scenes where he talks to Neo about Zion, and just the way he says, "We're not supposed to talk about this, but if you are, very exciting time."
Yes.
And then when he's talking to Trinity and Neo about when they're gonna going after Morpheus, and he says, "Neo, this is Loco." It's just so many great touches, and then when they rescue Morpheus and Morpheus is on the line, he says, "Damn good to hear your voice, sir." He just like he brought so much to that role, and he was so fun. I think he adds like everybody on the crew is really great, but I think like more than anybody else, he brought real humanity as one of the only people on the ship who was actually born in the real world. There was something so beautifully human about his character, and so I love him, and then of course we definitely have to mention Matt Doran as Mouse. Who we know him from somewhere else too.
No, I vividly remember, because I did not realize this at first, but when we went back and did our watch party for this movie, and I was like, it dawned on me almost in real time that Matt Duran is Elon Sweezbegana from Star Wars: Attack of the Clones. That was one of the all-time, point at the screen, like reverse, like, oh my god, it is him. um, uh, he doesn't get a chance to rethink his life in this movie, unfortunately, because he goes out in pretty brutal fashion. But he has some great moments before he goes.
He's he's upgraded from he's gotten out of he's not dealing George anymore. Which is good.
Well, technically, this movie comes before Attack of the Clones. So.
Oh, that's true. So I guess he's gone. Yeah. I don't know. I say he got upgraded to a much better version of the Matrix.
Yes.
He just didn't. Yeah. He didn't choose to take his life in a positive direction. But hopefully Obi-Wan's influence, though, did good for him. And I hope somehow he meets back up with the woman in the red dress.
I think he does in some variation, because I actually think there is a canon like story comic or something that shows Elon Sweezbegano in the background with a kid. So he did find his woman in the red dress in the Star Wars galaxy, but not here.
Yeah. Which again is like is another one of my favorite moments, because as a 15-year-old kid, when Morpheus says, "Are you listening to you, or were you watching the woman in the red dress?" I'm like, as a teenager, I'm like, I know what I was doing.
Yep.
And look again, and then it's Smith. Yeah, that's
so we would not have survived in the Matrix, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
At least not at that age.
Yeah. No, yeah. At that age, all the machines would have had to do is, hook me up with, a digital version of, would have been Natalie Portman at that point. And, and yeah, I would have been like, I'm sorry, what revolution? What? Yeah.
Little did you know that Keira Knightley was just on the horizon. So.
I know, like, I off topic, but we talked about this when we did the episode 1 stream. Like, it is so wild to me that Keira was hiding in plain sight when I was fawning over Natalie Portman, which I do not regret. That was absolutely
I was right there with you.
a right thing to be doing. But yeah, the fact that Keira was right there and I didn't even realize it at the time. So
that's the way these romantic comedies often go. It's like she was right there the whole time.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the mid-roll right now, and then we'll come back and we'll go through some major sequences in the film, because this movie has some really great ones. But I just want to talk about what is coming up, because we have a lot, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but we'll be having to talk soon about what, making sure we line up, our schedule after we get through these next few ones. But next week, we're going to be starting our coverage of the original Star Wars trilogy, and we're starting off with the classic 1977 Star Wars, which I can't wait to talk about. And I know you're probably going to be stuck, watching what Lucasfilm gives you. I will be watching the original 1977 version.
which I
of the
remember
film.
you showed to us when we all got together in Dallas, and it was a great experience. But you know what? I have that version of the movie to live on in my memory, and I will be just fine with McClunky. I get it all to myself.
I swear to God, Lucas
We will be talking about McClunky next week.
Lucas did McClunky to fuck with all of us.
Oh, that's why I love it. That is why I love it so much.
So bad, so horrible,
So wonderful.
No, it's not. And I will also be like, I will also be sort of passively aggressively only referring to the film as Star Wars throughout the course of the stream.
You can do that. I've been noticing you've been doing that. I will use the subtitle A New Hope because I do think it fits in the larger galaxy. But yeah, these are the kind of wonderful dynamics that I'm really looking forward to parsing out because in many respects I feel like we've been building up to this for the entire time that we've been doing this, and on the other hand, I'm a little intimidated because it's like what else can one say about a movie like Star Wars, the original. But
Yeah.
I think we're going to find a way to talk about it for one of our customarily long discussions because there's so much great stuff to parse out. Well, not just in terms of the movie itself, but how it revolutionized cinema. And yes, I'm sure we're going to touch on the whole special edition controversy. And I will just note in advance of that the special edition was what introduced me to Star Wars in the first place. It was the first thing I ever saw in Star Wars, which is why I have more affection for it than you do.
Here's the thing, though, and we really should be saving some of this stuff, and we will get into it in more detail next week. But I will say, like, ironic, you guys know how, or maybe people watching don't know, and this will be information for them. But I always put a trailer for what we're discussing in the description, and I always also put a trailer for the next stream, so people haven't seen a movie, they can watch that. I'm struggling to imagine that people watching our channel haven't seen Star Wars, but but it's there. But I went back and I looked at the original trailer and I was like, no, this isn't working for me. It doesn't capture the vibe of the movie. So I did actually put in the trailer for the 1997 special edition, which is filled with so much nostalgia for me. But here's the thing, and I will get into this more next week. If the 1997 special edition was available for me to watch, that would be the version that I would watch. And I know that's controversial, but my issues only really came into play in the changes made further down the line. And a lot of this just comes down to what was the version you were first exposed to, and yeah, I know 97 still had, Greedo shooting first, and it's it certainly has its issues now that I can look back objectively, but it also didn't have the things that I found particularly egregious in terms of changes. When we get to Return of the Jedi, I'll really be harping on Vader's no. But yeah, as it is, I don't have access to those versions of the movie. Thanks, Lucasfilm. And so I instead have to go all the way back to the source and watch the original theatrical versions of the movies. And yeah, so, but yeah, we'll save more of that for next week. Yeah. And then the week after that, we're going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of Batman Begins.
Very excited for that one.
Yeah. And then a week after that, continuing on our Star Wars discussions with The Empire Strikes Back. After that, the 25th anniversary of The Patriot. looking forward to that. And then we'll be finishing off with Return of the Jedi on July 6th. And then the week after that, we are going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the original X-Men film, which I'm super psyched about that. I've been like patient for that one because I'm like, I want to slot that in like when the anniversary actually is.
Yeah.
So I've had to wait for it. And and we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about that. So yeah, lots of fun stuff coming up. And yeah, once we get through all that, we'll unveil the stuff we have coming down the line. But we have to talk about what those will be, because those are the extent of our plans for now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a couple things on the horizon for later in the year. Namely, once we get to November, we're going to have our big retrospective on the 20th anniversary of Pride and Prejudice. But we have to get there first. So.
Yeah. And if we're sticking to our original plan for that, I think we are also going to make sure that we talk about the 1995 Pride and Prejudice leading into that as well, which is something we promised to do. And I'm looking forward to that. So, yeah. Okay. Having said that, do you have anything else before we dive back in? Okay.
Nope. We can go.
All right, let's dive back into the Matrix. We've talked about the amazing characters of this film. Something else that this movie is really known for are some of its big set pieces. And I'm just like, I thought about like, I was like, oh, what happens earlier in the movie that we should talk about first? But then I'm like, you know what? No, screw it. Let's talk about the big one first, which is the lobby shootout.
Yeah.
Which is, what everybody else thinks of with the Matrix. And yes, I, did want to go ahead and acknowledge that it carries some baggage with it, real world baggage. I'm not gonna focus on that because this movie cannot control what bad people took from it. But I will say I want to plot myself back in the theater seat in 1999 watching this movie, and it was the coolest fucking thing I'd ever seen. And just the fact that it starts off, you've got, saying, what do you need? And it says guns, lots of guns. And then they go into the lobby, go through the metal detector, and the guard says, please remove any, metallic items you're carrying, keys, loose change. Holy shit. So much fun. And then combining with the techno music, in the background, it is one of the most like classic scenes in cinema history. It's, it was like, this is what made like Neo and Trinity like cool.
Yes.
Just the way that they moved, and the slow motion with the music, and then like there's a beat at the end of the shootout where like Trinity like slides on the floor, and and with her shoes, and then they get like the elevator, and got ding as the walls are still coming down. But yeah, just the choreography of the whole scene is like mind-blowingly incredible. And I was watching this today, and still I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, no, I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't shout out the name Yuan Wu Ping, who is the fight choreographer for this movie. Because again, if now we're getting an Oscar for best stunt design in the next couple of years, and thank God for it. But like, I kind of feel like if this was the movie that really like said, yeah, we need that category, because in many respects, in when it comes to Hollywood action, you can really draw a demarcating, dividing line on special effects into before bullet time and after bullet time. Because after bullet time was invented by this movie, everyone wanted to do something like that. And to this day, The Matrix is still probably the film that has uses it most effectively, and I found this entire action sequence, thrilling as you did. Both in the way that it plays with the classic ideas of like the badasses coming in to lay down holy hell and setting off the metal detector on the way in, because of course that has to be in any such movie like this. But then getting to see what makes it different, where Neo and Trinity are, running up the pillars and flipping, off the walls, and and still like firing perfectly and taking out these poor guys who again they just showed up to work that day and they don't know they're part of the system, but unfortunately they are. And any one of them could
Yeah,
be
it's
agents.
and the movie sets this up so that it allows us to feel guilt-free about
Yeah.
this by setting up that anybody still plugged into the Matrix is potentially an agent. So
Yes, exactly.
they basically need to, every normie they see is just a moment away from being an agent. So they've got to take them all out, and so that allows us as an audience to say, okay, we can enjoy this.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that, like we see the agents take over a bunch several normies during the latter parts of this sequence. But
Yeah.
yeah, again, setting that kind of moral complication aside for the sake of just the movie being able to tell its story. Like this is really the moment where we are starting to see Neo step into his full potential. Before this, he had not been as frankly badass as he was here, even when he was fighting Morpheus, in the training program and everything. But this is one of the reasons he has leveled up in here in many ways, is because he has made the choice to go back for Morpheus, and so he is now coming into his own power. And Trinity is obviously already there, so seeing them team up for this sequence is thrilling.
There's a wonderful beat where like Neo's just taking a moment to like he's behind one of the pillars and he's just like, he's all out of ammunition, and Fiance like just throws down, pulls out some more, and it's just like this lull in the scene, and the music is still going on, and he's doing it's sort of ramping back up, and then he comes out from behind the pillar with the guns down. You see the bullet falling down and stuff. It's just like just the whole orchestration of the sequence is just so cool. And and again, I mentioned sort of the real world, but it's inescapable that unfortunately some people took inspiration from this scene to do evil deeds, but it doesn't, and so you do have to kind of think about that, but it's not the movie's fault. And I stand by the fact that even with that in mind, this remains one of the coolest sequences in cinema history. So I'm not going to let any of that ruin it for me. And yeah, I will never not be in love with this. And this, I will say, the music in this scene, I'm trying to see if I can find out exactly which piece of music which song this was. I think it's called Spy Break by the Propellerheads. But this was, I remember this was like the one piece of music I'm like, it was on the regular like song soundtrack album, but it wasn't on the score soundtrack album. And I'm like, if there was any piece that should have just been thrown on the score CD, it was this one, because it's such like an iconic piece of music in the film. So yeah, I love it to pieces.
Yeah.
And I will say, actually, I had to track down that piece of music when I was younger and in high school, because I did like a short homage to the Matrix, where it was me and a friend of mine, where we got like, black coats and and sunglasses, and we just did like a variety of different, pre-choreographed like fight moves and stuff, and then I slowed it down in the editing program and laid the music over top of it. And I felt cool.
Yeah, you should. That's that is the magic of movies.
But yeah, it's so great, and without a doubt, like one of the most iconic parts of the movie.
Yeah, no, and this entire, the lobby sequence is probably the most famous part of it, but like, and obviously when it starts to, move on and goes up on like onto the roof, with the helicopter and everything, like that's where we get the classic bullet time maneuver from Neo, and we realize just how capable he's becoming, and then the taking down of the helicopter as well, like that was mind-blowing for the time, is when it crashes into the.
I just want to say, when they're up on the roof, and I think it's before the Neo does the bullet time thing, where he goes back and stuff. It's when he like runs out of bullets, and the agent is coming towards him, and he just goes, "Trinity, help!" and
she does.
Yeah, and then like he does the bullet time thing. It's not quite fast enough, and then one of the agents comes up and says, "Only human," and then Trinity comes up behind him, gun to his head, and goes, "Dodge this." Which again, so freaking cool.
Yeah.
And then she's not done with the cool, because Neo's like, "Can you fly that?" And she goes, "Not yet."
Yeah, the fact that they can upload all these programs and learn these things instantly is obviously like one of the movie's great triumphs. It gives us the iconic "I know kung fu" line.
I can't tell you just how like wild I went. Again, it's like, it's now we think about it and it's so iconic, but just I remember watching that, and just like the build up and the way the camera pans around Neo as he's taking in all this stuff, and then his eyes just open slowly and you hear the music go, and he goes, "I know kung fu." It's just great. And then show me. Which honestly leads us into another great sequence to talk about, which is the fight sequence between Neo and Morpheus.
Yep. Yeah. And the iconic, another equal iconic, Morpheus with the hand gesture.
Yeah, which comes back at the end of the film when Neo is fighting Smith, beautifully. But Morpheus was the first to do it, so he gets the pop culture props for that one. It's, and obviously so much of this stuff is taken from it's an homage of Japanese cinema, and you mentioned the fight choreographer, and so much of this stuff would, in a way, get not that we as Western audiences weren't familiar with Japanese martial arts action, but this style really, I feel like it kind of introduced us to it, and then it really got a spotlight, perhaps in a more proper context, when Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out the next year, which is also a movie I've had on the back burner for us to talk about it at some point. I feel like I have to try and get Airy for that one, though, because that's something that we've talked about for a long while. So yeah, it's just a great sequence. I love when Neo realizes how well he can fight, and then he starts to get like really exciting. He's like, because that would be any of us when we all of a sudden realized that we were experts in all these complicated martial arts techniques. Even I think like that especially rang true for me, because at the time this movie came out, I was still taking karate, and I had been doing so since like 1993. So I think I may have even been, I think this might have been around the time that I made black belt, as a matter of fact. And so I was very much into all the martial arts stuff. And so this was a really cool sequence for me. And, and then just all the great moments where, Morpheus being like, you think that's air you're breathing now? And, and just the way that when he goes up, like in the air and like is coming down in slow motion on Neo, it's just, like, it just sounds like we're repeating ourselves, but the action in this movie is just so off the charts insane.
Yeah. No, I mean, it can be hard to talk about, action in the same way, when we don't always have the exact technical terms to describe it. But, we ultimately, it's like the emotion of it that is really, carrying it through, because, this is thrilling cinema to watch. And that's how we were responding to it, you going through it like beat by beat, like, and how cool it is to see these two actors playing these characters, exchanging blows, and doing flips and takedowns, and it's it makes it, this is a case where like you feel the action is viscerally real, because it is actually real people doing the stunt work for these movies, and like obviously it's this is what revolutionized the industry, the fact that that they started to use these things like what they refer to now as the wire fu, which was originated in Hong Kong cinema and involves these highly trained martial arts performers being attached to wires so that they can do things that look superhuman, and that obviously is something that many movies tried to replicate, perhaps somewhat less successfully than The Matrix did. But it also just led to an explosion of innovation with this type of art form. And people who worked on these movies have gone on to revolutionize things as well. Like we mentioned the John Wick films. The director of those movies, one of the big creative influences, Chad Stahelski, worked as a stunt double on The Matrix, and obviously he has acknowledged the influence that movie that had on his career going forward. Carrie-Anne Moss has talked about the fact that basically every role that she's got offered after this was because of what she was able to demonstrate with her capability with the fight sequences on The Matrix. So it is ultimately one of the most important cultural developments in the history of movie making, with the fact that they were so able to perfect this art form and then keep evolving it.
Yeah, and I did misspeak. I'm rather shocked at myself. I think I said in Japanese action cinema. It is, of course, a Chinese action cinema, which is such a shameful mistake on my part. But obviously, um, you know, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was very much rooted in, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this. See, this is where having Ari here would really help. They'd be able to take the burden off of me. But Wuxia,
Yep.
um, uh, is a genre of Chinese fiction concerning, martial artists in ancient China, and so that's very much we're seeing some of that on display here, and um, and it just felt like it was great because I remember when Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was coming out. I think, am I wrong in saying that it was the same fight choreographer?
Yeah, I believe it. I will confirm that. It is the uh, yes.
Yeah, I don't. I
Yes,
just
yes, yeah, it is. It is the same fight choreographer. Yun Wu Ping.
Yeah, and I remember that was part of the marketing for that film as well. And of course, like it was, it was such an American thing to be like, oh, if you you know, it's similar fighting style to that from The Matrix, and it's like obviously this stuff had roots, in Chinese cinema, that was then, that then inspired The Matrix. But yeah, I think that for many of us, seeing it in The Matrix set the stage for Crouching Tiger, and then yeah, and that was so amazing. Um, See, now I just want to talk about those great fight scenes in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon because they're great too. But yeah, it was just, man, it was a great time,
Mhm.
just because, like, and talking about sort of the state of cinema at the time, like obviously there were a lot of great like CGI effects present in The Matrix, but there was, a lot of, as we've been mentioning, wire work, and and they, created bullet time, um, for this, and uh, but it was like, but it was still so much was rooted in traditional filmmaking techniques, and so we hadn't fully gone over to, um, like the sort of CGI overkill that would, that would be prevalent throughout, sort of the mid 2000s. And so what was so great about movies like these were that so much of the, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm seeing, action was, rooted in like wire work and elaborate stunt work, and all that. Um, and it was just, it is one of the things, like, uh, we can sort of say this if we ever do a Matrix Reloaded uh, discussion, but it's one of the reasons why I, had issues with, when they really went into overdrive with some of the like CGI doubles of like Neo and, Agent
Yeah.
Smith and stuff. It wasn't the CGI work necessarily itself, but it was the fact that that was not it was not the same kind of thing that they were doing on this film, where
Yeah.
where it was sort of real world stunt work. It was, and I remember feeling like once you turned it over to a computer, it removed the engagement that I think that this film presented us with. So, but but yeah, it just, So absolutely incredible. And yes, I wonder if there's some other, I'm trying to think of some other big sequences before we just plunge right into like the big fight at the end. But
well, there is the one that it's the opening sequence, which is
yes,
when Trinity is, we actually, it's funny that like we open the movie with, Trinity is almost being framed in the way an antagonist would be framed, because we start off with the cops and then the agents coming, and that when he's like, I sent my men in after her, and the Agent Smith is like, no, 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 commander, or whatever, no, captain, your men are already dead. And that's the kind of thing where we get to see like, in many respects, like if this were a different movie, this would be like the law trying to apprehend a dangerous criminal in Trinity. And the revelation that we get when she actually, like, she jumps up in the air higher than a human should be able to and starts taking these guys out. And you're like, oh, this is entirely different than what we thought. And then we find ourselves grounded in her perspective, because after she does all this, she just kind of has the little, she says under her breath, shit. And then we actually score with her as we're seeing her, like the agents start coming for her, and we see her, capable as she is, have to run. Like the moment when she dives down the stairs and immediately has to turn around and point up the guns, and then has to talk to herself, get up, Trinity, get up, and then start running again. Culminating, of course, in the moment where she has to race essentially Agent Smith to the phone booth while he's trying to crush it with a giant, truck, and
which
she gets out in the
again,
nick of time.
yeah, which again, like I'm going to talk again about how the fact that like being back in like 1999 and seeing this without even knowing anything about the movie and seeing her run towards this phone booth as this big truck is barreling towards it, and you're like, what the hell is she doing? What is going on? I don't understand any of this. And then she just disappears, and you're like, what? That's the thing. Like, you really did not understand what the hell was happening in this movie until like a half an hour into the film, and
Yeah.
which was great. Like, it really put you like on your back foot, where you were having to really pay attention, and you're trying to figure stuff out. And then once Morpheus is explaining the nature of the Matrix to Neo, then you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. But like, it was really different than, it's like so often, like, especially in a modern context, we think of audiences as needing to be spoon-fed
Mhm.
things. And here was a movie that presented you with, a world that you couldn't possibly understand what was transpiring, until a certain point in the movie, and it's asking the audience to go along on that ride and trust the story. And yeah, so I love that. But yeah, this opening sequence, like I mentioned before about how I said to my friend Tim, it was like, God, imagine showing this to people from like 50 years ago. And that was specifically the point where, like, when Trinity, jumps off one roof onto the other, and we like follow her into the air as her like whole body is, moving in slow motion. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, holy shit, I've never seen anything like this. This is so wild.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the great little moment where after she does that, and then Agent Smith follows her, and the guy who was behind him is just kind of like, that's impossible. And it's like, yes, it is, and, at least according to the rules of the rules of the world that you know. But those rules are about to be broken, and I do have to imagine the funny little bit where he gets up there and then he's like, and we're gonna have to take the stairs, guys, and go all the way back down because we can't do that.
I will. I do want to take a moment to. I'm both going to praise someone and then gripe about some things. Uh, the person I want to, uh, just applaud is the cinematographer Bill Pope, who created an absolutely stunning looking film. like he's just another one of these people who, like, without him there is no Matrix, because part of what's so great about the film is just the look of the world that's established. Um, However, along with that, I also have to gripe about the way that, now I don't know if he's also been involved in these decisions, but certainly I imagine the Wachowskis have been driving the decision making here, has been the decision making of the color timing of these films on every iteration of their home video release. Uh, because it is George Lucas level tinkering, except instead of like inserting new CGI and stuff, they have messed with the color timing of this film for years. And a big part of that is wanting to get the film in line with their vision of what they felt the Matrix should be, which is that there's a distinctive green look to the world of the Matrix when you're inside it. They didn't quite have that achieved when they did the first film, and it was a more subtle approach. And so many of the scenes inside the Matrix had more traditional looking cinematography to match with the rest of the film. But there were touches like with the set design, and like it still gave off that vibe. It just wasn't as in your face. When they did the first re-release on DVD in preparation for the sequels, I think they, or no, it was after the sequels. It was the box set. They regraded the film to match the sequels, which had like a green overcast basically over all the scenes in the Matrix. And then when they came back to do the Ultra HD Blu-ray release, they went back in and got really specific with things, and they were able to make it so it wasn't like a blanket overall like shading of everything green, but now there's this weird, like, it's really aquamarine in its look, and it's still like a really dynamic, attractive looking transfer on the home video, but it does not look like the film as it was in theaters. And I think that's a shame, because I think it should be available like as it appeared, being such an important part of film history. I also know that I'm like, well, I'm not the only person who gripes about this. I also acknowledge that the vast majority of people probably don't care, but still, it's something that like that I'm like, why can't filmmakers just leave their stuff alone?
Well, it's just because of the type of people that they are. It's what, again, we had talked about this with like what I affectionately, or not so affectionately, sometimes refer to as director bullshit, where directors kind of have they can create like a brilliant like work of art, but because they're so close to it, they see all the little flaws that many of us would not necessarily see, and so sometimes they can make comments that we find a little bit silly. Like I've joked about like the Robert Eggers saying, "I think The Witch is an okay film," and I'm like, okay, what are you smoking? It's brilliant. And and obviously we've talked about Denis Villeneuve at length and everything that he went through, and you're like, stop throwing your all-time classic cinema under the bus. And this is a little bit different, as you said. It's a little bit more in line with just the George Lucas philosophy of constant tinkering, and this is a case where I definitely agree. I wish the original was just available for people to watch without the modifications. But we kind of get into that gray area of like, once the art has been released, does it still belong to the artist to do with as they will, or does it now belong to the community who may want it to just stay as it is?
And to be fair, like, And to be fair, a lot of films go through this every time they're released on home video, because the impulse is there for, whether it's the filmmakers or the studio, to tinker with the original look and have it look more modern. But this feels like one of the more egregious examples, because the difference is quite extreme. Like I said, I don't like it. Doesn't ruin it for me. I watched the movie today. Had a great time. It's an attractive transfer. It's just I'm well aware of the fact that it looked different. And I think because it's such a classic piece of cinema, it stands out a little bit more as a result of that. But yeah, I don't want to gripe about it too much, because at the end of the day, the movie is the movie, and it's it's great regardless. And none of that I'm gonna I don't want any of that to take away from what I said about Bill Pope's amazing cinematography, because cinematography is more than just color grading. It's there's a lot involved in that, and his stunning work shines through regardless. And it is such a distinctive looking film. And yeah, I think some really fantastic work was done. Okay, so yeah, unless there were some other specific sequences you wanted to talk about, I do want to move into talking about the the finale of the film with after they do rescue Morpheus, and you mentioned that sequence, that's pretty incredible in of itself. When the rescue on the helicopter, the way he jumps out on there, and then Neo jumps out to catch him, and that's just incredible. And then there's the whole thing where the helicopter's going down, and Neo is rapping the cord around, and then Trinity goes swinging with the fire, the explosion behind her, and then just slightly bobs against the building, which I always thought was funny. And then they're escaping, and there's a moment where Trinity wants to tell Neo about her feelings, but ultimately they're like, no, it's not the right moment. And then right as she gets to escape, she notices Smith take the form of the homeless guy in the subway to appear, and then Smith fires the gun. The phone explodes, and Neo's trapped there. The music ramps up, and we hear Mr. Anderson. and then we're treated to just an amazing finale sequence, which again, we get this great sequence, which includes that shot you talked about earlier, just when they're going through the air firing guns at each other, and it's where Neo finally starts to although I'd say he'd started stepping up quite a bit, but this is where he's believing that he actually could be the one, and he's having that kind of faith in himself, and so he decides to stand up to Smith. And yeah, it's just it's just so great. I love, there's something what's so great about the fighting style in the film, and especially this fight, is what I love about it is that there's this wonderful obviously it's taking from the Chinese martial arts and the wire work and stuff, but there's something so brutal about the fighting as well.
Yeah.
Just the way that they're kind of like the way the punches land, and it's not always like the prettiest thing where like they'll sort of do these round punches where it's like almost like you're fighting in a video game, and it's really fun, and I just I love how borderline really annoying Smith gets. The scene where he keeps going after Neo with he repeatedly refers to him as Mr. Anderson. It's just a point of really hammering that home. And of course, it's all leading up to that beautiful moment when he says, "My name is Neo."
Yeah. No, I mean, it's there's great emotion in this fight, and it's also just, it feels very visceral because, as you said, there's a combination of the elegance of the incredible wire choreography and martial arts, almost mixed with an element of street fighting, where the characters are they're using the environment, and it is very brutal because they're fighting in a hard concrete in place, and then there's the moment where Neo manages to Smith is trying to use the train to kill Neo, and then he manages to get out of it, and the poor homeless guy gets run over, but then Smith immediately shows up by stepping off the train as having taken the form of somebody else, and it's almost that classic video game moment of why won't you just die? It's because you haven't leveled up yet to the sufficient level. Smith is a little still, you needed to go get that special, item that confirmed that you were the one before you were fighting this particular boss.
Can I just say that really is sidebar for a moment. That really is my favorite cliche. It might be my favorite cliche of the whole "why won't you die?" It's in everything from GoldenEye to Austin Powers.
Yeah.
And it's always so much fun. So sorry.
I mean, and it can be great fun with both dynamics. There's both the dynamic where it's the hero is facing the villain, and they're just why won't you die? we ran you over with a train. We shot you in the head. Why are you still coming back? But then there's also the inverse of it with the villain having taken out the hero and thinking that they've won, and then the hero just keeps getting up, and the visceral, "Why won't you die?"
The iteration that I love in GoldenEye is, "Why won't you just be a good boy and die?"
No, I mean, but honestly, it's set up for what's coming, which is the fact that ultimately, because Neo doesn't have the tools to fully beat Smith yet, he eventually does have to run. And it leads all up to that devastating moment where he almost gets there, and then he opens the door and Smith is there, and there's no way out, and then Smith just starts unloading his gun into him. And we, again, if this was your first time seeing the movie and not knowing the story, it's shocking. It's shocking to see Neo basically all die here.
I do want to hand it to Smith. He cannot possibly anticipate that the power of true love is going to bring Neo back to life. So he actually does what so many villains don't take the time to do, which is he makes sure that Neo is dead. He fires that gun over and over and over until he's sure. And then he has the other agent check his pulse and verify that he's dead. He does everything that you're supposed to do.
Yeah, except maybe go for the head, as Thanos said. That is the one thing he probably could have added to the repertoire. But I think for anyone else who wasn't the one, he did enough to make sure.
And then of course, again, even after the whole "my name is Neo" thing, he again has to go, "Goodbye, Mr. Anderson." And yeah, and then we get that beautiful, moment with Trinity, where she tells Neo that the Oracle told me that that I would fall in love and that man would be the one. So you see, you can't be dead. It's just this wonderful bit of defiance of, no, damn it, I don't accept this. So get up. And yeah, and it works. And and again, if you're a cynic, you're maybe rolling your eyes at this, but I'm like, no, of course it works.
Yeah.
That's the way true love works.
Yeah, no, she pulled the reverse Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, and as pulling again from The Princess Bride, death cannot stop true love. All it can do is delay it for a while.
Yes, indeed, and Neo was only mostly dead. So,
yeah.
so yes, it all comes back to The Princess Bride. Yeah.
And again, I'm going to cap things off by once again singing the praises of composer Don Davis, because this scene might be his greatest achievement in the film, as Neo starts to stand up and that chorus comes in underneath, and it's not chorus like Duel of the Fates chorus, it's like angelic chorus. As and then the agents fire their guns at him, and he just softly says no, and puts his hand up and stops the bullets.
Yeah, and paired with the scene back on the ship where they're like, "How is he doing this?" and Morpheus's odd, response of, "He is the one," and you're like, "Yep, your faith was rewarded."
And then Neo just picks out one of the bullets, drops it to the ground, and the rest fall. And yeah, and then he can see the Matrix, in code, and he can bend it to his will. And then comes the great part, which is Smith raging at him, coming after, and Neo is just not even barely paying attention and just blocking everything. And then that great kick that sends Smith all the way down the hallway, and and then and Neo finishes him off by literally jumping inside of him and blowing him up.
Yeah, which again, you would be forgiven for thinking, okay, yeah, that is Smith fully finished and dead. But as it turns out, he's only mostly dead too, and he will be back.
Yeah. But of course, the best part of all this then is when the two other agents just look at each other and then run.
Yeah. Yep, nope, not today. We don't get they're telling their Matrix over AI overlord that we don't get paid enough for this shit, so we're gonna
go. And then it's great, the all the while the Sentinels have been the Sentinels had found the ship, and they're tearing it open, and so at this point Trinity screams at the top of her lungs, "Neo!" And Neo goes towards the ringing phone, and thankfully he picks it up quick enough before they have to turn on the EMP to kill the Sentinels. And which also, side note, this was confusing for me because they said Sentinels and I was expecting X-Men Sentinels, so what gives?
Yeah. I'm sure that the machines have those tucked away somewhere too, but yeah, they in this case they deployed the squid guys, who are scary and dangerous,
Yeah, and this is where we get we finally get the kiss, to close out the love story in the movie. And again, Don Davis's great music, you know, as chaotic and dissonant as so much of the music in this film is, there's a beautiful love theme underneath it, which again, oh my God, if we get to talk about Matrix Reloaded in particular, I am going to talk a freaking half an hour about how much I love the Neo Trinity love theme in that film and what it does. Because it's just absolutely gorgeous. But we get it more subtly throughout this movie than in the sequel, but it's beautiful nonetheless. And then the movie finishes off in wonderful badassery with Neo explaining to the machines how it's gonna go. And you know, I'm going to show these people a world without you, a world without rules or controls, without borders or boundaries, a world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you. And then hangs up the phone, and then like this is like I part of me wants to drive about not letting Don Davis like finish off the story and like, you know, with, you know, the movie with his score and stuff. Yeah. But then I'm also like, no, the song choice they picked here was incredible because it's just, again, it finishes the movie off on this element of cool.
Yeah.
You know, with Neo just standing there and just kind of, you know, coming out of the phone booth and just, you know, looking amongst the crowd and putting on his sunglasses and then flying into the freaking air like Superman.
Yeah, which is one of the great closing shots of the time in this era of filmmaking, and it's one of those things that, you know, even though yes, some people have mixed feelings about the sequels, this is a shot that is immediately like, no, sequel now. Because you can't leave us like that. Like knowing that Neo can freaking fly now, we've got to see it, and we do in the subsequent movies, as the other characters will say, he's doing his Superman thing.
Oh God, it's just like, yeah, it's just like above all, like, you know, and it's not like we haven't said it throughout the stream, but for all like the movie's deep ideas and, you know, and great, you know, filmmaking techniques and like all this stuff and phenomenal performances, it's just fucking cool. Yeah. This is a cool movie. And, you know, and yeah, I just, it's been 26 years since it came out, and I am just, okay, maybe I'm not quite as in love with it as I was when it very first came out because I was insane for it, but I do like love it. You know, it's probably got a bit overshadowed in the years after that for me, because there was a lot in those few years. You know, it was the same year as The Phantom Menace. It's the next year was Gladiator, and then after that was The Lord of the Rings
and the X. Yeah.
So there was a lot going on, but this stood out as like a really big like game changer for cinema. And like, again, like, I can have gripes about the sequels, but then in 2003, you know, as much as I don't know if I agreed with the title, because, you know, 2003 was for me the year of Return of the King, but it was dubbed the year of the Matrix because there were two back-to-back Matrix sequels. And however you felt about the films themselves, like the buzz going into all that was off the charts insane. Yeah. And I remember the first time like they showed the teaser for it on television, I think it was like, I think they did it like during the Super Bowl or something like that. And it's just, it had like Morpheus narration about, you know, what if the war could be over? Isn't that worth fighting for? Isn't that worth dying for? With all these flashes of images from both sequels. And me and everybody else was just like, yes, God damn it, yes. So like, yeah, this movie changed so much, and it's so much fun to go back and get to watch it over and over in all the years since.
Yeah. No, and I still, it still, holds up brilliantly. And I think that as just a, a piece of, cinematic art, it has earned its place in film history. And the story that it tells, like over the course of, the three major prime movies, again kind of setting the fourth one aside for a second, like I do think that everything does kind of pay off in the end, because even if some of the flaws that the second and third movies, Reloaded and Revolutions, have in terms of execution, they are still devoted to the central themes and tenets and core idea that are present in this movie, which is pretty unimpeachable. And yes, this is a movie that above all else, it obeys the rule of cool, and does that better than almost any other movie in terms of just how much it lives up to that.
I do want to make like one last comment about, in terms of like the sequels and their merits, like whatever flaws I can point to and whatever gripes I or anybody else might have, like there's Monica Bellucci there.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like we that is a case of like when I saw that, I'm like, okay, this movie has delivered on its promise. She comes back in the third one too, very briefly, but Reloaded is really where she gets to shine.
I'm just gonna say that dress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna not go too far down that line of thought before this whole thing gets derailed. But yeah, and actually, on a serious note, I will say I think that part of the movie and that whole section with not just with her but with the Merovingian and all that is some of my favorite stuff in that film in particular. I think it's really interesting, and I think the actor Paul Lambert is that his name. I actually loved him in both the sequels and wish we had gotten more of him, because I thought he gave a really fun performance. But that's a discussion for another stream.
It's Lambert Wilson is his name.
Lambert Wilson. Why did I say Paul Lambert? That didn't make much sense. Lambert Wilson. I knew Lambert was in there. But I think one of my favorite lines from the entire trilogy is, "God damn it, woman, you will be the end of me." But yeah, it's but just focusing back on this film, it's seminal for me. It's again, like I know some people who maybe feel like the sequels for them tarnished the first one. I don't feel that way. Even if again, even if I point to some stuff I didn't like in the sequels, I think that this film is so great that I don't think you could tarnish it, because I think it stands on its own as a beautiful classic piece of science fiction, and I actually do feel like the sequels actually do add to it, just in terms of like even leaving the films themselves aside. I think their very existence and what they talk about vastly enrich the content of this film. And when you're talking about the ideas of this film, which is why we weren't able to totally leave those films out of the conversation today, because it's actually impossible, because they impact so much of what we know about the characters and about the story.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's just fun to talk about this movie. I'm really glad we finally got to do it.
Yeah.
And we missed the 25th anniversary last year, but that's okay. You know, everything happens in due course. But yeah, is there anything? I know there's lots we didn't, you know, story beats we didn't touch on. But is there anything in particular you wanted to mention?
I mean, so it's just something that I alluded to earlier, and it could open up a much larger and wider conversation. But we don't need to like fully delve into it. But in particular, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people in the modern times, now that both Wachowskis have come out as transgender, have now taken to speaking about this movie as quote unquote an allegory for the transgender experience. And this is one of those things where I kind of bump up against specifically my view of having films be allegory and nothing else, because I 100% see what they're talking about. It's once you know it's there, and it's kind of unavoidable. And especially given both of what the Wachowskis, transition, and the fact that they have been openly out saying like, yes, this was kind of like in our subconscious when we were making this movie. And I'm like, but where I kind of bump up against it is only in the sense of there are certain people who, when they hear that a movie is an allegory for something, they try to jam everything about the movie into that that experience. And I don't want them to do that for a movie that's like reducing, like to reduce the movie just to that, because like, yes, like if you want to think about the whole idea about the follow the white rabbit and the red pill like representing like hormone therapy and all these things, like it is all there, it's all there, but it also is telling its own story, and so if it becomes more of like an intellectual film criticism exercise to basically take the movie and basically go through it beat by beat and say that, like this is representing this part of the transgender experience and this is representing this part of the transgender experience. And that's an entirely valid pursuit to have. But I just find for me, it kind of makes the story a little bit less fun to engage with, because I think it adds added deeper resonance to the creative mission behind the movie. But I also don't think that if you want to watch the movie and just appreciate it, as it was in 1999, and like, as a story about like humanity fighting up against this, evil AI thing, you can do that. And then there's this added thematic layer you can add on top of it. But if you reduce the movie to only that, I actually don't think that serves the movie well. So I respect the Wachowskis for saying that like this was kind of our inspiration, and we were telling the story in this way, and if they were making it now, they would perhaps made it more overt. And I fully respect that, but I also want the movie to kind of be able to be its own piece of art as well.
Yeah, and because it's one of those things where like I have to contend with like my own understanding of the film and how I feel about it in light of those conversations, and particularly in light of my own journey that I've started to be on. But for me, just speaking from my own experience growing up with this movie, it's first obviously it was just the story itself, which I took as a science fiction story on its face about race of machines enslaving the human race, and that's what it was. And then as I got older, it started to be about sort of mankind's own self-imposed enslavement and breaking free of the things that we just take for as a given, and also in our technological age, the way that we're sort of enslaving ourselves. I think the Matrix, is, the thing that I draw, parallels to the most always are just, I think we've created the Matrix in our modern age with social media and the internet, and maybe a lot of people don't even realize it, or they realize it and they just don't care, and it's like, wow, you really are just a bunch of ciphers, aren't you? But then it's unquestionably like, if you look at what the journey of the Wachowskis went on and their personal story, it doesn't surprise me in the least that was in their minds. And I think that acknowledging that doesn't take away from other readings of the film or just enjoying the movie as it is on the face of it. Because I think this is where you get into a conversation. You're right. This could go on. This could get really deep. It gets into, what Tolkien said about the fact that he didn't like allegory. He preferred applicability, which is that, people can derive their own meanings from works of fiction. Now, I suspect the Wachowskis probably are a bit more forgiving towards allegory if, in fact, it was their intention to write this story in that way. But I don't think that an artist's intention to write an allegory necessarily binds the audience to that interpretation. No. I think that there's a lot of, I think the Matrix is full of applicability. I think there's many different ways you can interpret the story and different meanings that you can derive from it. I certainly have over the years. And a lot of it has depended on where I am in my life and the things that I'm struggling with. And that has affected my interpretation of the story. So yeah, the only time I would have a problem with it is if somebody came up to me and said, like, this is my reading on the film. It fits this exactly. And you're not allowed to feel any other way about it. Then I would have a problem with that. But otherwise, like if somebody wants it to be a one-to-one allegory of the trans experience with very specific, examples, more power to them. And they certainly can't be blamed given the Wachowskis' own, their history and what they were probably striving for, writing the film. So, and like I said, I have to like process that on my own. I haven't even begun to like, go there with it because I'm just dealing with my own journey. And so I haven't yet had the like contemplated like going into movies and stories that I loved and starting to reevaluate them from, from my new understanding of myself. So I'm still in a place where the Matrix means other things to me, but I'm aware that those things are also a part of the story and were undoubtedly part of the creation of it. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's up to everybody individually what they take from a story, because you're completely valid if what you take from the Matrix is the story. It's just the story of, of Neo being told he's the one, and and a revolution against the machines. If that's the way you view the Matrix, then that's how you view the Matrix. There's nothing wrong with that. And yeah, so that's how I feel. I think at the end of the day, it's up to the individual.
Yeah, and that's ultimately where I think the point lands, because I'm glad you brought up Tolkien, because I think a lot of my personal distaste for films as pure allegory comes from Tolkien, and like people's attempts to basically say that the Lord of the Rings is a direct allegory for Tolkien's experiences in World War One. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's informed by those experiences, but it's not actually like meant to be a one-to-one comparison there. This all it crops up a lot in like modern film criticism, where people have a tendency to need to tie movies to the political reality of the moment, and so when they take a sci-fi action movie and basically say this is actually an allegory for the experience we are going through in Donald Trump's America, and I'm like, I don't think that was the intentionality of the film. You can see parts of it in there. That's where the individuality comes into it, but trying to reduce it to that, I always push up against it. And I think The Matrix does this much better than other movies, because again, I do believe the intentionality was there, whether it was subconscious or not so subconscious. But I just, as you said, want everyone to be able to approach the movie on their own terms and not have to watch it in such a way that like this is the only way now to see the movie. It's there, it's multi-layered, and everyone will have their own experience with it. And I think it's incredibly important that a movie like this is there for people who are part of the trans community and have this movie to look to as if they want to. It may not reflect all of their experiences, but in this case, it's a movie, it's a piece of art, and ultimately art is subjective. And so part of what makes it, resonate with you is what you bring to it. And me not having been part of that, community, I have to acknowledge that like when I watch the movie, that is not where my mind goes, but I acknowledge that it is there and it is valid.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's one of those things where you never quite let go of your own unique experience with something, even as you will be informed about things later on. Oh, this was intended, or it's because at the end of the day, a story is a very personal experience between whether it's a film and you're a viewer, or it's a book and you're the reader. It's always going to be very personal, and I think it's part of the issues with is sort of modern day fandom, is that we don't leave room for other people's experiences. And so it's everything will mean something different to somebody else. That's the way it rolls. But as long as we all have respect for other people's interpretations of the things that we love, we're fine and dandy. So there shouldn't be any more problems, right?
Yeah. One would hope.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just felt that was important to acknowledge, because it is a popular strain of criticism or artistic engagement out there, and I want to acknowledge it, while also saying that you can also just talk about the movie as we did, so
yeah. But yeah. God, but how great is it though, like that this is a film which like can inspire so many different readings, and and spark so many intellectual debates, and as well as just being a rip-roaring yarn. It's absolutely delightful. It's easy to just sort of gloss over the achievement of this film, but it's actually what the Wachowskis did with The Matrix is nothing short of astonishing. And so I'm glad we got to go through and talk about it today, and just bask in it all, because I had great fun watching it, and a lot of fun discussing it as well.
Yep. So did I.
Okay. I don't know what to do. My plan worked. I had like a structure that I wanted to follow for today's streams, in the hopes of like not going on for 5 hours, and it actually worked. We had a really great discussion that only stretched for a little over 3 hours. So
I think the number one thing about that plan was that we weren't talking about Star Wars. So I don't know if it's going to be sustainable for next week. But yeah, this is a tight, like just over 3 hours.
It could be. I could conduct next week's stream in a way that like I could guide us in that direction. But the question is, will I want to? Or will I want to just take us through every beat of the movie?
I'm down for either.
Yeah. But all right. Well, thank you all again for joining us tonight. Again, next week we're going to be talking about the classic 1977 Star Wars. And the weeks to come, we'll be talking about the 20th anniversary of Batman Begins. We'll be talking about The Empire Strikes Back, the 25th anniversary of The Patriot, Return of the Jedi, and celebrating another anniversary, the 25th anniversary of X-Men. So looking forward to that. And also, gotta say, it's coming out on home video soon. I think I'd really love to talk about Sinners.
I was hoping you would say that because I think it's coming out in July 22nd or somewhere around there. So, yeah, I would
actually sooner than that. It's coming out on, I think it's on Blu-ray on the 8th of July. It's in.
You're right, July 8th.
Move that up. And also, it's coming out on digital this Tuesday. And for anybody who goes that way and just wants to get the digital version, I actually am not all that sure I won't crack and and get it because I really, really want to see the movie again soon. But
yeah, no, I think we can probably pencil that into the schedule because I'm fully planning to get the Blu-ray of that, and I think it would be a great fun to talk about, and an important movie too.
Yeah, no, I love that. I thought that movie was great. Definitely one of my favorite movies of the year. And yeah, it would be a great joy to talk about. Might even look in to see if we can get somebody to join us on the stream for that one too. But yeah, but that's a little ways down the line. We still have a lot to get through. But yeah, so I think that's about it. Yeah, anything else before we sign off, Jared?
No. I mean, I'm happy that I think we did the movie, justice despite not going for 5 hours. It's a tighter movie. But I'm looking forward to, continuing our discussions for the next couple of weeks. And while it may be a ways off, I would be open to revisiting the Matrix sequels at some point in the future because I think we touched on them enough.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think though what I want to prioritize once we get past our current crop of stuff, we've already talked about Sinners, about adding that to the schedule. I think I really want to do some Game of Thrones streams.
You're speaking to my heart right here.
So let's get in there. Let's get dirty and cause some mischief. Yeah, we'll exchange some words with some people on those discussions. I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure, but we're ready. We were born ready for this.
Well, are we going to get into all our thoughts on George R.R. Martin?
Oh, George.
Oh, it's a love. I wouldn't go as extreme to say it's a love-hate relationship, but it's a love disgruntled relationship.
Yeah.
Not too dissimilar from the George Lucas relationship that I have.
Trust me, of the Georges who have contributed to the seminal pop culture, fandoms of my life, I'm far happier with George Lucas than I am with George R.R. Martin, but I still love the guy.
Well, we'll get into the Lucas side of that next week when I have some words about special edition changes. So we'll see, but yeah, no, I think it would be really fun to finally get into Game of Thrones, because we put that off long enough.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get to talk with you about Thrones, in this capacity, would be a lot of fun, because I will say that one of the funnest times that I had were those watch parties that you and I did for season 8, which was just great. Mostly because we didn't have to listen to anybody else while we watched the episodes. But yeah, it was just great. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. And I guess when we do it, we'll just go for it. We'll break it down season by season. We might as well.
I figured that was the way we would do it, and obviously it's a longer project, but that'll give people time to prepare for what's coming.
Okay, let's go ahead and sign off. Thank you again, everybody, for watching tonight. Hope you had a good time. Join us next week. We'll be talking about Star Wars. Until then, I don't know what would we even say to sign off for this one.
I don't know. How about this? You have to let it all go, Neo. Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind.
And please, all of you, go help your landlady carry out her garbage. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.